everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today I want to try to speckle on some non-superwash yarn. Right here I have 200 grams of Wool of the Andes worsted weight yarn, which is 100% Peruvian Highland wool. It is technically possible to speckle on non-superwash yarn, but it is not as easy as it is on superwash yarn because the superwash treatment allows the fibers to absorb dye that much faster, which is why it's easier to get more even coverage and things like that on the non-superwash version. I'm not doing a side-by-side comparison, but the colors I will be using to speckle for this will also be used in another project. But it's still not the best comparison because the other consideration for how quickly colors strike is on the spin and the twist of the yarn. Wool of the Andes is fairly lofty. It is not a high twist yarn. And so that allows colors to spread a little bit more as well. The more twist there is, the harder it is for the dye to penetrate very far, and so things tend to stick more where they're placed. So I'm not sure how well this attempt will work, but we're gonna give it a shot. And I will be using these glass jars for the speckling because I'm using them for another video, which will be down below. And our color palette today is going to be Golden Poppy, Tangelo, and Pink Orchid Dharma acid dyes, which I will mix with citric acid powder to dilute the dye so we can spread it out as we attempt to heavily speckle it, or maybe not that heavily speckle it, onto our yarn. If you would like to learn more about any of the yarn or other tools and equipment I am using in this video, I do have affiliate links in the video description, and I also have some blog posts where I talk about my favorite tools and other equipment for dyeing yarn, which should also be linked down below. Whenever I'm dealing with dry dye powders, I will be wearing a P100 respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves, and everything that I'm using for this video is dedicated for dyeing yarn and isn't used with the preparation of food. I mix each of the three colors up with 2 tablespoons of citric acid, and we'll see what's left. I'll probably be working on this project at the same time as the other one I am trying to deal with. So maybe I'll show that yarn in the conclusions as well. But I wanted to make sure that there was plenty of powder. And so since I haven't used these containers before, there'll be a bit of a learning curve, but that's okay. To my catering steam pan, I'm gonna add our 200 grams of not perfectly pre-soaked, but still pre-soaked Wool of the Andes yarn. And I wanna add enough water to cover the yarn. In this container, the water I'm adding started out as 8 cups of water with 6 tablespoons of white vinegar. So a lot of acid is in here already, but of course we will be adding more with our speckles. And so what I want is for the yarn to be at the surface, but I want when I move it to be able to see some water at the bottom of the pan. So I'm gonna add more. There we go. Most of the yarn is at the surface. And so I'm going to slowly start heating it up. We are over 2 burners, and I added, I would say, approximately 5 cups of that mixture, which I'll save, and we can use that to add more water later on. All right, we are hot. I'm gonna reduce the heat to low. And then I don't think I'm gonna be able to lightly speckle. I don't think that that is going to be very possible from the way that I have this set up. But what I might do is do a lighter application overall. And there's a little bit stuck to the top, so I'm just going to wipe. I could do all these colors all over, but I also know, I don't think anything's coming out yet. There we go. The more I layer these colors, the harder it'll be to see the speckles. So at least at first, I'm not going to do very much. But then we can always decide to do more. It's very much like adding sprinkles on to sugar cookies. So I can already see, I definitely see speckles on these colors, but I do see the colors spreading out a bit more. I'm going to give this about a minute, and then we're going to zoom in to see what we can see. The honey mustard color does have speckles. It is a lighter color overall, and so that was going to be harder to see. The Tangelo has a few little specks in here, but mostly it's spread enough that I'm no longer seeing those itty bitty pricks of color. And then finally, our pink orchid, I am seeing speckles over there. I am. I think that this project may not be the best example of what I'm trying to achieve. But I'll talk about that in a moment. First, I'm going to go ahead and layer more color all over this yarn. I added the 3 colors all over and then decided to wait for at least 10 minutes before flipping this to add color to the other side. The reason why I decided to go for this all over and treat this a little bit similar to what I'm doing on what I would do on a sock yarn is that I want to play with these colors and see the kind of effect we get on this non-superwash yarn, which may or may not feel very speckled in the end. But we'll look at it at the end and see there, because I think that to try this project again on worsted weight yarn, what I really need to do is start with the worsted weight yarn, high acid, and I think I need to use the citric acid speckles with my fingertip to try to spread them more. Because if you're gonna get more pastel speckles that are a little bit larger, if you have a lot of those next to each other, you're gonna see more of a wash of color, a larger section of color versus itty bitty little specks. And so I think that to give this kind of technique a much better shot, that is what I need to do. But it is really fun, and I will show a side-by-side of what I'm doing with these exact same dyes on the Hawthorn fingering weight yarn, which is superwash fine Highland wool nylon. And over there with these exact same dyes, we're seeing itty bitty little specks that I'm heavily layering onto the yarn. So with any kind of technique, there are pluses and minuses, and so yeah, this is going to be an amazing, gorgeous yarn, not quite necessarily what I was aiming to achieve, but I think that, yeah, I think that trying to speckle with fingers would help me spread things out more. So that's one thing I could do. And another thing I could do if I had these dyes in the jars and I really wanted to use them would be to add more citric acid or even like table sugar or something to dilute it more in those containers. So then when a bunch comes out, the dyes themselves are going to be more spread because it won't be as concentrated. But anyway, I think the color is gorgeous. So the wool of the Andes is on the right, and the colorways look very, very similar right now. But the speckles on the Hawthorn are a lot heavier compared to the wool of the Andes, where I do see some speckling, but there's no question we have more spread, and that's just because of the nature of the yarn base. Let's go ahead and check. Okay, that's not bad. The colors have absorbed. There actually might be a few spots where the colors haven't. Like over here, it looks like there's some that's like on the surface, but I'm not going to worry about that. I am going to flip the yarn. I'm only dyeing 200 grams of yarn here because I wanted to be able to spread things out well and potentially do some fewer flips. And you can see that the colors have spread a fair amount through here. We will do at least one more flip. I don't mind if there is some white left. Again, I really like this colorway, but I also really like these jars. I think that this is a really nice way to layer color, and I may have a fair amount left over from all of these dyes. Oh, that may have been a little heavy. So there might be just extra color to play with later on, but the nice thing is that with screw-on lids, well, it should be pretty easy to store. But I definitely find myself being a little bit more vigorous as time goes on. Oh. It is definitely a little hard to get near the edges of the yarn, and I can tell I'm being sloppier as I go on. But again, these colors are so pretty. So I'm gonna wait approximately 10 minutes and then we will flip and add more color. This colorway feels incredibly sunset to me, and I am enjoying the variation that I'm getting in the softness from these colors because we're applying it with dry powder. It might not be speckles that I had originally set out for, but we are going to end up with more variation and tones in this than we would have if I had been layering on liquid dyes, because the dyes would have then spread that much more. So the spread that we're seeing is smaller compared to what we might have seen otherwise, which makes this technique extra fun. I did try to wait approximately 10 minutes between each of the different flips just to give the dyes a chance to start to strike. And again, I wasn't worrying about some white left behind, but I didn't want large blank patches. But I have a feeling the coverage, even at the flip that started this little time lapse, was pretty good. I just decided I'm done here, and I added the rest of the water, but I do have a tiny bit of dye from the sticks I used to mix the dye originally. So I'm going to dilute this in 8 cups of water. Never mind, in only 5 cups of water. There's really not that much pigment, but I don't like to leave dye behind. So I'm going to add that, turn up the heat, and then I am going to actually wipe sides down a little bit. But then I'm going to heat this for 30 minutes, turn off the heat, and let it cool down completely so we can wash the yarn. Let's wash this wool yarn. Okay. It is very pretty and sunset. And I am very excited to see it dry. Just added a bit of clear dish soap. The color is very vibrant looking right now. It may look more pastel when it's dry, but I love the way these colors blended together. I am so glad I went with the Tangelo instead of blazing orange, which I had considered at one point. And yeah, I'm very excited. So let's see. I don't think we have any bleeding, which is good. I'm rinsing in cold water, which now that it's winter is quite cold. Oh my goodness. But yeah, I'm not seeing any bleeding. So this is so pretty. I am going to go ahead and put this, maybe do one more rinse, but then put this through my spin dryer and hang it up to dry. Here is the finished dry worsted weight non-superwash speckle attempt yarn, or at least heavy speckled attempt. And this colorway is stunning. I am, from where I'm standing above the yarn, I do see some speckles here, but I did know that as soon as I added the dye to the yarn, this probably was not the best setup to try for a heavy speckled colorway on a non-superwash yarn. But I'll talk more about that in a moment. Let me zoom in. Here you can see some speckles. The pink did the best job of that because some part of it started to strike fast enough versus spread. I think that the orange and that more golden yellow both definitely spread more. I mean, this yarn is beautiful. We have small patches of color, but if we compare it to the yarn that I speckled, there isn't much of a comparison. I am focusing here on the speckled region, and it almost looks like it is out of focus because of how much more spread out the speckles are in comparison to our fingering weight yarn and those itty bitty tiny speckles. So there are 2 things that came into play here. One is that our worsted weight yarn is non-superwash, and so it's going to take colors longer to absorb. So when the color hit the yarn, it spread a little bit before it started setting. So that's one aspect, the non-superwash yarn. The other aspect here is that sock yarn is KnitPicks Hawthorne fingering weight yarn, which is 80% superwash fine Highland wool, 20% polyamide, but it's also a 2-ply high twist sock yarn. Wool of the Andes has a fairly lofty ply. It is 4-ply, it's a thicker yarn, but it's not high twist. And so therefore there isn't that additional resist in there. It means that as the dye adds, it has that space to soak in. So even if this were Wool of the Andes Superwash, the speckles would be sharper, but not quite as sharp as they are on the Hawthorn because that twist is different. You can get speckles on thicker, bulky yarn that's superwash, but the thicker the plies are, the more challenging it is to get sharp speckles. So if I wanted to try to get heavy speckles on this non-superwash yarn, I should have set this up on my countertop with very little liquid in the yarn, then added the dye on the countertop and steam set it. This would prevent, with the absence of liquid, would mean that when the dye hit the yarn and dissolved a little bit, there's not enough liquid to pull that dye more through the yarn like there is with low immersion. And so we would have a better chance at getting heavy speckles. And that is why I need to redo this experiment. But there's also actually a third thing. There is a third thing, and that is the colors that we choose. We had more luck speckling with that pink than we did with our orange or golden yellow. I'm totally blanking on the color names at the moment. And so if I picked a color that I know speckles well, say for example true black, we might have better luck seeing separated speckles versus the colors sort of blending together when we apply them heavily. Whereas, some of the colors we had here today did not strike very quickly. And so immersion-wise, we could potentially get better low immersion, speckled feeling yarn on worsted weight yarn if we pick the correct dye pigments. So those are 3 things that we can try to do differently to attempt this again. So if you would like to see any or all of these, please let me know down in the comments below. The speckles between the non-superwash and superwash yarn don't really compare. Okay, fine. You can compare them, but they just have a very different feel in the softness versus sharpness. But this is a variegated, speckly kind of yarn. It's just a different kind of speckly yarn. It's a softer, more blown out speckly yarn. And this technique reminds me more of the type of yarn I get on superwash yarn when I use squeeze bottles and do lines or hearts of color and layer things that way, where you end up with softer, small patches of color. So I love the effect that we got here, and this is something that I would like to do again because I love how it turned out. It's just not the effect I was originally going for. But that's why it's worth trying things out, because sometimes you might not get the effect that you were trying to see if you could achieve. Not that I think I can get this on Wool of the Andes, but I thought that I would get, I think that I will be able to get more spread out speckles on the base. But I love this effect, and I will do this effect again to get this effect. And so I really hope that that makes sense. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I love to dye yarn and to sometimes, instead of trying to fix my technique to try to get the colorway I was trying to do, sometimes I like to lean into what the dye is doing and see where that goes. And I'm so happy I did that today instead of changing up the technique to try to get the effect I wanted originally, because I absolutely love this, I adore this, and as I said, I'll do it again. So please give the video a thumbs up if you want me to play with more non-superwash yarn and other non-superwash techniques, and leave a comment below to let me know what kinds of colors you think I should try. I come out with new videos at least twice a week, sometimes more, and so by subscribing and turning on notifications, you won't miss a new video. I do try to read the comments and keep track of suggestions and color combinations and things like that. I don't always see replies to previous comments really easily, but I do see new comments. So if you have a follow-up question and I don't reply, sometimes it's best to just leave a full new comment on the same video or different video, and I should see it. I do my best to reply to questions. Thank you so much for watching.